But actually, before we move further, perhaps we could just have a moment of silence together. It's always a beautiful way to start any task. Moment of silence. And you don't need translation for that. Thank you. Silence is really the language of the soul. And although we'll use many words this weekend, it's really the language of the soul that we will exchange in that language and experience. Joachim has put forward a very beautiful vision for the weekend. And I love this saying that anything is possible if you go to the very core of who you are. I think that sums it up. There's hardly anything else to say. And also you put before us a path really, a very elevated path, a path of virtue, a path of non-violence. And that reminds your comments on the current state of our society, our community. But we're here this weekend to get to know ourselves. That would seem a paradox because you've registered, you've given your name, you've given your identity, and yet we're here to know who we are. Because as was mentioned, very often we know who we are in an external sense, and when we relate to others, we relate to them in that sense. Yes, I know your nationality, I may know your profession, I know your gender, I know perhaps your social standing, whatever it is. And you probably notice that when we meet people, when we see them physically, we look at the costume, because as was being mentioned, this is really a costume, isn't it? A costume for the inner being. When we look at that, we often make many assumptions as to what that person may be like. Am I right? Have you ever been, I'm sure you have been in a situation where you've seen someone, you have built up a picture in your mind of the kind of person they must be, what their opinions must be. You know, you've got their personality labelled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then you actually, and actually some of it may be based on what other people have said about them. Then you actually meet the person, you talk to them, you get to know them, and you discover that they're completely different to what you assumed. Who's had that experience? I'm sure we all have. Because our identity is not about all the external things with which we may label ourselves, but it's much more about the inner being, about who we are. But the problem is that we're very, very influenced by all of the things that happen around us every day. And very often the boundaries become blurred between who we really are and the influences around us. In fact, why there's so much confusion is because we make this false separation between the self and everything around us. We don't know how to separate the two. And this is the path, the journey we're going to walk upon. Sometimes we feel we want to retreat completely, and sometimes we're so confused that we don't know who we are. But there's a balance, there's a way to live in the world. I think life very much is about feelings, right? When we live in life, we live in our feelings. We like to think that we live in our thoughts. We like to think that we live in our head. But even the most intellectual of people, even the most academic of people, will live their life on their feelings. Why do we get angry? Because we live by our feelings. If we just live by our head, there'd be no point in getting angry. Everything would be cool and clinical, and you'd just say, this has to happen, that has to happen. You'd weigh up every situation logically and you'd act accordingly. But that's not the reality of life, is it? In fact, again, something that Daddy Janki said, a phrase that has stuck with me a lot. She said, it's a lack of truth to think that the one who insults me is my enemy and the one who praises me is my friend. Is this what our happiness is based on? So we come back to truth. We come back to who we are. And if I was to summarize or define spiritual intelligence, I would say it's this: knowing who we really are and knowing our true original qualities. And there are many terms you can give to that: soul, spirit, consciousness. But this is who we are, and we know very well when that energy of who we are, that energy of consciousness departs, you know the person isn't there any longer. It's the physical flesh and bone that remains. It's the inner being that gives life to this body. It's the inner being that is us, our personality, who is doing everything that we do. I, the being, am thinking, I'm acting, I'm speaking. And our original qualities are eternal qualities. What are those eternal qualities? Peace, love, wisdom, strength, joy. And these are qualities that are innate, are inherent in every single human being. For many, they're quite well suppressed, but they are still there. Non-violence is really when we think and talk and act and interact in a way that does not cause unhappiness to anyone, doesn't cause hurt to the heart of another. And in fact, violence has become a way of life in our society. Why our society is violent today is because of the violence that we do to ourselves every day.